Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. It is time for Sunday Night Live with Richard Nongard, Scott Sandlin, and tonight our guest, Michael Watson. So get ready to get. There we go. Our intro song. This gives people a chance to get ready. There's a chat box below. Say hello. Say hello to Mr. Panda, Michael Watson. And to me, Scott Hogue, welcome aboard. Aaron Little, Fable Goodman, a whole bunch of other people. Stephanie, Antonio, it's great to see everybody there in the chat box. Hello, it is Sunday night. Time for Sunday Live. Every Sunday, Scott Sandlin and I get together and host an information course, webinar class that lets you not only learn more about hypnosis and NLP, but experience it as well. Some of you might be saying, where is Scott Sandlin? Well, according to the last message I got, he is now on a plane. So he will not be joining us. It'll just be me and the Panda substituting for Scott. And, of course, our guest tonight, who is Michael Watson. Michael Watson, as you can see, has some awesome hat software. So it's great to have you, Michael. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Good to be here.
And Michael's joining me from Florida. Those of you who don't know who Michael Watson is, he is an NLP practitioner, a hypnotist in Florida. He's also an instructor at HPTI, and he's going to be teaching next month's or March's class, actually a week or two from now, on NLP. So it's great to have Michael. I'm going to ask him a few questions here, and he's going to share some things with us here in just a moment. But I want to remind you of a couple of awesome things I learned today that Stephanie, Scott, and Richard, and Rachel, and the rest of the people who are working on Hypno Thoughts Live for this July have actually published the schedule today. So if you're interested in the August convention, the Hypno Thoughts Live convention, and who's going to be speaking and what time and what day, just go over to the Hypno Thoughts Live webpage, which is, of course, well, Stephanie, type it in the chat box. That'd be awesome. It's htlive.org or .net or something like that. You can also just go to hypnothoughts.com, and you can actually just, find that link, hypnothoughts.com, anywhere. But anyway, the schedule's out. Most of you know where to find it. Scott, represented by the Panda today, has made a post about it, and the schedule's updated. Lots of great people, lots of great opportunities. Speaking of opportunities, tonight is your opportunity. We not only get together to talk about hypnosis and NLP and those sorts of things, but we also get together so that you can ask some questions, have clarity about any of the courses you're taking or the things that you're learning or the concepts that are important to you, but also a chance to experience hypnosis or NLP. Michael and I have talked a little bit about how today's class is going to end. A little bit different than our usual trance experience, as he's going to guide you through some ways that you personally can understand some of the core concepts of NLP. Michael, let me start by asking you a couple of questions, and that's an awesome hat, a graduation hat there. It's pretty cool. How did you get interested in NLP? How long have you been doing NLP? And what's the relationship between NLP and hypnosis?
All of the right questions, as a matter of fact. I've been doing NLP for 31 years. I realized tonight when I was getting ready for this talk, it surprised me to notice that much time had gone by. But actually, my story is, I'd rather just tell you the short version, but my story is that I was a priest in the Episcopal Church. I actually ended up, towards the end of that time, spending a couple of years in a Benedictine monastery. And when I came out of the monastery, the bishop gave me a job in the Diocesan Counseling Center in Chicago. And the deal there at the time, if you remember back to the mid-'70s, the deal was in counseling psychology that everybody was getting excited about creative visualization and guided imagery processes. So I was doing a whole lot of work like that on a regular daily basis, and one day I had a client who said to me, it completely took me by surprise, who said, Michael, I wonder if you realize that this is hypnosis. And I had no clue. I thought hypnosis had something to do with waving pendulums and barking like chickens and and all those things. So I was really quite surprised. And as I looked into it a little bit, my undergraduate background had been in linguistics, so I was really kind of fascinated pretty quickly. And I moved from Chicago to Houston simply because I found out that there was a woman teaching a class in hypnosis there, and I was so naive at the time that I didn't realize that you could get trained in hypnosis all kinds of places, you know. And so literally, I moved across the country just to take this course. That turned out to be only 30 hours worth of training. It was like 3 hours a night on Wednesday nights for 10 weeks. And at the end of it, I was really pretty good at doing inductions, but I didn't really have a good sense of how to do really quality therapeutic work. But coincidentally, the lady who was teaching that class was enrolled in a very early NLP practitioner training. And so she was kind of spoon-feeding us some of that information, and I was reading the books. And again, I got so pumped up on it that I moved again. And I moved from Houston to Colorado, where I studied with the Andreases at NLP Comprehensive and their training staff there for quite a while. And I did logistics work for them for a couple of years. And ultimately, while I was there, I ran into Robert Dilts, who came to do a testing weekend for us. He's one of the basically one of the original developers of NLP, along with Bandler and Grinder. So I moved to California to study with Robert Dilts because he was doing work with beliefs and their applications to health-related issues and stuff like that. That was all very interesting to me. And then while I was in California, I got hooked up with John Grinder, and I did logistics with him for a while. So I've kind of been working my way around the country by following teachers. And I tell you, most folks don't have that opportunity. So I really realize how blessed I was to kind of have the freedom to be able to do that. Fortunately now, because of the internet and things, information is much more accessible. Places like HPTI make courses and things available to people, so they don't really have to pick up their stakes and move around the country like I did. But that's how I got there anyway.
It's amazing our paths never crossed up until about a year ago, and you and I just met for the first time about a year ago. We really haven't had a chance to visit too much, but although I was not an Episcopal priest, I was a minister in the Disciples of Christ Church in the Chicago area just a couple of years after you. So my background, as some people know, is also as a clergy person with my degrees in religious training and things of that sort. So it's fascinating that that we might be practicing hypnosis or NLP for a long period of time, and in another career, whether it's sales or whether it's ministry or whether it's anything else, and not really realize where the roots of that intervention really is. Now, let me ask you a question, though, because I know a lot of people who are participating tonight are very familiar with hypnosis and trance, but can you give me a definition of neuro-linguistic programming, of NLP? Because a lot of people say, I hear about it all the time, but what is NLP, and is it really any different than hypnosis?
Well, actually, the funny thing is, historically, NLP almost could have been seen as a subset of hypnosis for a minute, I think, in its development. That is, if you think about where it came from, the folks on the call that are old enough to remember the campus unrest of the late 60s and the Vietnam War and all the stuff that was going on, part of the student protests that were happening in California were really impacting the California educational system generally, and it wasn't just about the war. It was about student activities and various things in the educational system itself. So in California, at Santa Cruz, they decided to set up the campus in kind of an experimental way. It was a little different than anything that they had done before. And what was going on was, rather than being in classes all day long, and sitting in straight rows and doing the things that students usually do, most of the students had faculty advisors, and they were essentially on independent study programs. There were certain lecture courses. Grinder taught some semantics courses and linguistics courses, rather. And Gregory Bateson was there, and a few people that did lecture classes. But basically, people were pretty free to do the kind of experimenting that they wanted to do. And John Grinder tells a story that I think is really useful for understanding it, because he was a published author of a number of papers in linguistics, and a rather established linguist, and he had some a whole lot of other careers before that contributed to it. And John says that he was sitting in his living room one Tuesday, and a knock came on his door, and when he answered the door, it was Richard Bandler, who he was meeting for the first time. And Richard just introduced himself, and he said, "I'm one of your advisees." And he says, "I've been I just came here because I wanted to get to know you." And they visited, and they had a great time. They seemed to hit it off at first. A couple of really clever guys, and then Richard looked at his watch, and he says, "Well," he says, "I've got to leave." And at the door, he stopped and he turned to John and he said, "I wonder if you'd like to come with me." And John was curious. He says, "Well, where are you going?" And he said, "Well, I've been running this Gestalt group, and I'd like you to come and see what we've been doing." And John's take on it was kind of unusual, because John wasn't interested in therapy at all. In fact, what he said to Richard was, "I think therapy is this sort of field of study that tries to make people normal, and I don't really have any interest in normal. So if you'll begging your pardon, I'm just going to bow out. I'm not interested in that." According to John, this same meeting took place something like 6 or 7 Tuesdays in a row. And Richard kept coming over, and they visited, and they chewed the fat for a while, and then he invited him again to come to this Gestalt group. So finally, John got insistent about it. He's like, "Why do you keep asking me to do this?" And Richard said, "When we started doing the group, it was our hope that Frank Pucelik and Richard were doing this group together. It was our hope that other participants in the group, by watching what we did, would be..."
Michael, let me interrupt you for just a second. I think you might not realize your hat's still on, and the chat room, which I'm watching, has decided, A, it's a distraction, but it's probably taking up some bandwidth. So if you could take off that hat, that'd be great. I think you might not realize it's on. So that'd be great.
You know what I'm trying to figure out?
You're trying to figure out how to get
the hat, because my little effects thing has disappeared from here.
Well, that can happen.
Yeah.
We're stuck with your hat.
Well, when I opened up the chat box, what happened is the controls for the hat seem to have disappeared, and I can't find them anywhere.
Well, let me just take a minute.
I'll keep looking while we're talking, but I hope it's not.
Let me ask you a question about NLP and how it can be useful. You said you went to Houston because you really wanted to study therapeutic ways of helping people. How does NLP transform a life? What can NLP be useful for? What kind of people make an appointment for an NLP practitioner?
Well, gosh, actually, if I can just sort of finish where I was for a second, because I think it'll make the point, is that that it depends on how you look at it. That NLP started out as a technology for modeling. The idea was to study what other people did and to figure out how they did it so well or so effectively, so that those skills could be translated to other people. And John got very involved with the Gestalt thing when he found out that that's what Richard was interested in. At first, it was about modeling and just learning how people run their inner game to produce, good results in the world or effective results in the world. As they started studying people, though, they studied therapists like Virginia Satir and Fritz Perls, as I mentioned, and ultimately they came around to Milton Erickson, and they started creating models from watching these other people work, with the idea that they then could replicate the same kind of skill set that those practitioners were using, and to be able to pass them on to other folks. So NLP really can be used to model anything and to do just about anything that there is. Its primary focus, I think, in therapeutic practice has to do with things like increasing motivation or overcoming habits that you want to change, or to be able to deal with stuff from the past that you haven't resolved, or changing beliefs, or overcoming fears and phobias. Those kind of things make up a real bulk of the work that I do, at least.
Sure. My favorite.
And then sometimes people come just because they want to find out how to. Go ahead.
No, you actually hit on my favorite definition of NLP. My favorite definition of NLP is we look at those people who have been successful in what works, and we try to model where their success has been. So, for example, me in my public speaking, I will look at those who are great speakers, whether it's a president who gives speeches, or whether it's Tony Robbins who does personal motivation, or a minister who might be very engaging to his congregation, or a speaker or a presenter in a professional education situation. And I'll try to distill what separates that speaker from somebody else. And in my own life, create models from those who are, really have something that I want. And I think that's really the heart of NLP. It's not about this process or that process. The definition of NLP isn't submodalities or whatever else. The definition actually is simply modeling success and using that which we know works to achieve success ourselves. Do you think that's an accurate perception?
I think that's an excellent way to talk about it. And in fact, what NLP really contributed to that process of modeling was some of the specific components to model. That is, people used to think, well, if I just kind of copy another person and do what they do, I ought to get the same results. But they weren't really getting the inner game. What makes the difference between Tiger Woods, for example, and some other mediocre golfer has something to do with the way that he thinks about what he's doing, or the way that he believes about what he's doing, and the various internal processes that go on with that. Back in the old days, I think people would have just stood and watched his swing to see if they could get their body to do exactly the same thing. But now it becomes more about the inner game, which was really big in the 80s or the late 70s. There was the inner game of golf, and the inner game of tennis, and the inner game of negotiation, and various books like that. And people were looking more and more at the internal structures of how people operated in the world. The formal definition, Richard, of NLP is that it's the study of the structure of subjective experience. That is, what's different in the way that you put your world results that we get, and in terms of the uniqueness that we have as individuals. But not only studying what people do really well in order to copy that, but also NLP gives us a tool to really sort of figure out how it is that our clients are having the difficulties that they're having as well, and how it is that they're running their brain to produce those particular effects and experiences that we've got some ideas about how to that weren't available before.
Sure. Now, what about the integration of hypnosis and NLP? For example, in my work, when I do a hypnosis session, I often use NLP patterns or techniques in a formal hypnotic trance as part of my suggestive therapy. Do you utilize NLP in that way at all with your clients?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's really what took me there. I think I mentioned that first hypnosis class that I took really didn't give me the tools that I needed, other than access to good inductions. So and later on, by the way, I studied hypnosis with Stephen Gilligan and a variety of other people, and have a whole lot of more things in my toolbox. But at that time, I was looking for techniques and finding a way that I could integrate them into doing hypnosis. When Bandler and Grinder were first putting this thing together, one of the first techniques that they came out with was something that's known as six-step reframing in neurolinguistic programming. And it happened at such a weird time in California's history because we've all seen things about laws about who can practice hypnosis and who can't practice hypnosis. And what was going on in this particular period was that in California, the Board of Behavioral Science examiners had required people that were practicing therapists to sign statements saying that they would not use hypnosis in their practice, that they thought that it wasn't a good tool, and they didn't want their folks using it. And so California had a whole lot of people who weren't licensed professionals that were learning how to do hypnosis, and various schools, came out, and then at some point, the Board of Behavioral Science examiners reconsidered their position, and they decided that maybe that they were wrong, and that the only people that should be allowed to do hypnosis in California were people that actually were licensed practitioners, and that the unlicensed folks should not be allowed to do this. So for a minute, things had gone absolutely backwards, and the only folks in California that knew how to do hypnosis weren't allowed to, and the only folks in California that were allowed to didn't have a clue. And right about this time, Bandler and Grinder came up with this technique called six-step reframing. And the first step in six-step reframing is to invite the client to go inside and to establish communication with a part of themselves that runs a particular unwanted or challenging behavior. And the very sentence, go inside, implies an altered state of consciousness from the beginning. So Bandler and Grinder, I think, knew quite well that what they were doing was hypnotic in nature. But because of the complications with the law, they didn't really want to call it that. And so it ended up standing out as a separate field, and more things were being offered that could be done outside of a formally induced trance. But truth of the matter is, in a different time, NLP and might have just been another part of the field of hypnosis and not separate at all.
Sure, and one of the things you point out to that I think is really worth,
at least that's how I think about it,
is the idea that we recently went through this with Nevada, who kind of went after hypnotists and said, hey, wait a minute, you can't be doing this unless you're a licensed mental health professional. And then, of course, they canceled that. Those in Nevada have been working, with the union as well as with the board and NLP practitioners and hypnotists to come up with a solution. But it's interesting how in every state where hypnosis has been restricted, that has always changed. And there is not any state in the USA, or maybe places in the world, but there's no place in the USA where people cannot practice hypnosis. There are places where certain words might be protected, like the word hypnotherapist, but the actual techniques of hypnosis and NLP aren't restricted in any state. And anytime there's been a move to try to restrict that, it's always been temporary, whether that was Indiana's law, which was sunsetted, or the old restrictions in California, which have long gone by the wayside, or even the recent attempt in Nevada to restrict practitioners. I always think it's worth pointing out because sometimes people get really frustrated about certain situations, and as I always say, it's kind of like Oklahoma weather. Wait 15 minutes and it'll probably change. But let me ask you about your class. You're going to be teaching a class next month for HPTI. It starts on March 1st, and actually up above the video, I actually put a link to the class if anyone's interested. It's a 40-hour class. By the way, down below is a chat box. I want you to ask any questions for Michael. I don't think Michael's following the chat box, but I'm following the chat box, and so I will relay any of those questions to Michael. But you're going to be offering this class as 40 hours, and the HPTI program is a great program. The courses are inexpensive. They can be accessed worldwide. But what are you going to be covering in this course, and how can it help somebody who already has skills in hypnosis?
Well, we're going to be covering actually the whole field of NLP. I'm really pleased about this because the way that it came about was we actually set up eight days to do the filming on, a number of weekends, like 4 different weekends, and on each weekend we filmed 4 hours a day, and the rest of the days the students that were in that class got to do exercises and a variety of work, but we were really able to present a whole 8 days worth of training inside of 32 hours worth of video, which is what the course is comprised of. So they've got 8 hours a week of video to watch, and then there's of course a live 1 evening a week hour-long meeting online, and a couple of projects and things to do to keep them really busy, so that they'll get really immersed in it. But mostly it's an exploration of this mysterious thing that is what we call the structure of subjective experience. And just to give you an idea what I mean by that is that what happens with things in the world, our nervous systems are bombarded with input. We see things, we hear things, we feel things, we taste and smell things. Everything comes in through the sensory systems. And then we go through this massive process of deleting and distorting the information as it comes in to make it useful to us as individuals. For example, the things that you see, if there were a car accident on the road, or here's even a better example. I remember when I was in college seeing a newspaper with two columns. And on the left column, the article said something like 237 Viet Cong killed in battle. And on the other column, there was an article about a father slain in a car train accident. And the teacher asked us, which of these two, really touches you or gets your attention. And of course, we've got these notions about, well, gosh, this one is a father after all, and he had children, and what a terrible, terrible thing. And these other guys, well, they were the bad guys after all. So we sort of sort the world out in that particular way. And one article will appeal more to somebody, and one article will appeal more to somebody else, depending on what their interests are, what their beliefs are, what their values are, and a whole variety of factors that literally make your experience different from mine. But also in the encoding of that, as you experience things, you make mental pictures, if you will, or you talk to yourselves about them, or you represent that information to yourself inside whenever you think about it later on. No. And when you think about it, just for example, right now, if I were to ask you to think about your mother, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking from a layman's perspective, you really, if I were, didn't have any knowledge of NLP or hypnosis, I'd be fascinated by what you're saying, because you're telling me this is creative visualization, this is talk therapy, this is experiential psychology, this is all of these things wrapped up into one. That's why a lot of people have been critical of NLP, and my thought has always been, well, which part of NLP? Because there's so much under the umbrella of NLP that to say a blanket statement, NLP isn't effective, couldn't even possibly be measured.
Right. Yeah. Actually, a part of that just broke up on me, so I don't know that I heard the last part of your question. I'm sorry, but. Well, I certainly know what you're saying, and NLP is a rich and complete field, a full field. So, like I said, some people think of it as being this technology for modeling, and in and of that it all by itself, that brings something great to the world. Whether you want to be better at anything at all, or whether you want to learn how somebody does something effectively, that's a great tool. And that doesn't even begin to address what it can do therapeutically.
Sure. So now, every Sunday night we get together to learn.
So if I might, just really quickly, share.
I think there's a delay. I don't know. I'm having snow. I shouldn't be having snow outside, so maybe the internet connection is a little wonky. Let's put a little bit of delay or a few breakups. Certainly apologize for that. But every Sunday night we get together to talk about and to learn about hypnosis. We also have a giveaway. I forgot to mention that earlier. At the end of this, I'm actually going to post a free copy of the Hypno Thoughts script book. So that's the entire script book. We mentioned that last week. I wanted to make sure those who were viewing last week knew that was going to be coming up and that I will pass that out. So every Sunday night we get together to learn and also to provide you with some resources, and that's a resource I'm going to provide before the night is over. Let me see if there's any questions specifically for you, Michael, that people have asked, because talked about a lot of really interesting things and a lot of cool things, and as usual, there's general chit chat in the box right now. But I don't see any particular questions for you. But if anybody has any questions for Michael, feel free to type them out, because I'm going to I'll be happy to pass those messages along to him. So, Michael, in your own life, how have you used NLP to accomplish some of your own goals or to be the person that you want to be?
Gosh, NLP has just absolutely changed my life. I can't say it more simply than that. And it isn't so much that I do a lot of NLP techniques with myself, as it is that I have an understanding of myself that's different than the way that I approached things before. That is, gosh, how can I explain this? I think one of the things that I discovered through neurolinguistic programming was the experience is a little more plastic, a little more moldable than I had thought. I sort of had the idea that things happen to you in the world, and then your job is to put up with them. Uh, you know, and I just came to a whole different understanding about them, that I realized it isn't the circumstances in my life that really make the difference so much as how it is that I meet those circumstances, and I have all kinds of control about that I didn't really seem to realize before.
Now, let me ask you a question about
just by learning kind of how to control it, or how to run.
Let me ask you about a process, for example, called image streaming.
Go ahead.
Originally created by Wen Wegener, back in the 80s, has been taught. And I've always seen a relationship between image streaming and NLP, but I never hear NLP talking about the technique of image streaming. Are you familiar with that? And is that anything that you've incorporated into your practice or understanding of NLP, the idea of image streaming? Actually, a question.
It's interesting. I was on one of Wenger's I was on one of Wen Wenger's groups for a while, and certainly followed it, and I loved all of those processes. To me, I think I have a little bit of trouble realizing that anything that I see, if there's steps and procedures to it, I'm thinking it's been modeled, and and I love experimenting with those things. It really isn't a primary modality for me, but it's one that I really have some respect for. I think it's great stuff.
Sure. Well, again, that question came from Antonio, and I thought it was a great question. I did post a video of me actually spending a little bit of time talking about image streaming, because of all the strange random questions. I actually happen to have a video of me explaining that process. But I've seen certainly a relationship between NLP and the ideas of image streaming. I don't see any other questions that people have asked right now. When Michael is done demonstrating, he's going to guide us through a couple of processes so we can not just talk about NLP, but actually experience a little bit about what NLP is. I'm actually going to post, as soon as we're done, that script book, and I'm going to post it in the same place I did last week, between the chat box and the video. So when we're done, it'll be available for you there. But Michael, to sort of help bring this home to us all, would you go through some processes for us and help us to experience NLP or hypnosis right here as we participate in this webinar?
Sure. In fact, maybe something that would be really appropriate in the amount of time that we have to do this would be to talk about submodalities, which is kind of one of my favorite features in NLP. And that's simply the idea that when you have a thought in your mind, you organize it in a particular way. That I started to say this before. If I were to ask you to take a moment to think about your mother, for instance, there would be an image in your mind of your mother, perhaps, if you do it visually, and some people do it in other ways. But for the sake of this discussion, let's just say that you make an image of your mother in your mind. Some people will make an image that sees their mother from head to toe. Some people will just see her face. Some people will see a three-dimensional picture. Some people, the image will have sound associated with it, and it'll be moving. In some cases, it'll be black and white. In some cases, it'll be a tiny little picture way off in the distance, or it'll be really close up. And all of those different variables make all the difference in the world in terms of how it is that you feel about that idea or that thought whenever it comes into your mind. So similarly, I had a woman who came to see me that had a phobia of spiders, and this is one that I really remember. And she was absolutely terrified of spiders, and I remember asking her, I said, well, if people really have a phobia, I don't think you necessarily need to have in your office a snake and a dog and a spider and a scorpion, and all of those things, and an airplane. That if people are really phobic, all they really need to do is to think about those phobic triggers, and you'll see some indication that the phobia is there. So I asked this woman, I said, what happens when you think about spiders now? And her head went back. She sort of pulled back like this, and her eyes got really big. It was an interesting thing. And I realized that the picture that she had in her mind of spiders wasn't something like this. So because I'm a smartass by nature, when I just asked her, I said, well, so you just make a tiny little picture of a spider in your mind? Is that what you do? And she says, well, no, it's like this big, and it's right up in my face. I think she had just seen arachnophobia or something. I don't know what the deal was. But I'll tell you what, anybody who, whenever they think about a spider, sees a 6-foot spider that's right in front of their face and about to devour them, if that doesn't frighten you just a little bit, then I think you're probably kind of crazy and maybe you need some professional help. So it made sense that she would have the kind of response that she had to the way that she thought about spiders. So when I asked her, I said, well, would it work if it were just a little tiny picture of a spider, kind of off in the distance? And she looked at me kind of funny, like I was the crazy one. And I says, well, just try it out for a minute. So she took that big picture of the spider, and she shrunk it down, and she moved it farther and farther away until it was just kind of a normal-sized spider on the other side of the room. And then it didn't bother her anymore. And the funny thing was that after that simple little experiment with her, she didn't seem to have this phobia at all. In fact, we really didn't have to do the whole phobia cure. We just had to teach her that it had something to do with the way that she was thinking about it. And that was the thing that I really sort of learned that I think changed my whole life, is that I knew if I was in a position that was less than optimal, it probably had something to do with the quality of my thinking, and that I have a number of variables, thanks to NLP, that I can adjust to change that makes all the difference for me.
Sure. We have just a couple of minutes left. Can you, I hear a lot of people talk about a swish pattern. Can you explain what that is and how it can be utilized, and maybe even guide us through a swish pattern process to help us understand the submodalities?
That's exactly what I'd like to do. In fact, the swish pattern, I think about it, another way to talk about it is turning mountains into molehills, which is sort of what we did with that spider. So just to give you an example, let's say that you've got some situation in your life that you'd like to change, and I would invite the people that are listening to think about this. Some situation where, whenever the situation arises, you don't respond with your best, that you'd like to have a better response than the one that you've got, but whenever it happens, you get plugged in. So it could be something as simple as when somebody cuts you off in traffic, or maybe it's when somebody that you live with or are close to, gives you that certain look or uses that particular tone of voice, or whatever it is, something that's likely to recur. And if you can find something like that that's troublesome for you, that would be a really great thing to use as I explain this process. So to begin with, though, you might think about what will be some of the triggers. So if it is a particular person and a particular tone of voice or a certain interaction, just kind of notice in your mind how it is that you see that, if you were to bring an image of that into your mind, just the way that you see it when you're really there. So in other words, you wouldn't see yourself, you would see that other person, and you would hear their voice and whatever it is that was going on in that situation. Or you'd see that car cutting you off in traffic or whatever it is. And just notice as you sort of see that in the way that it happens when it happens naturally, that there's kind of an unwanted response. Okay, then you'll know that you're working with something that would be worthwhile to do this with. And then just set that aside for a minute, and what I'd ask you to consider is that there is an ideal you, that there is a way to think about yourself, somebody who's just like you except evolved only a little bit further, and evolved in this particular way that's going to be useful here. That is, that new you that we're interested in creating, that ideal self that we're interested in creating, would be somebody who's just like you, except they don't have this particular problem. They've got a way to get past it. Somehow or another, they're able to be at ease with that interaction with that other person, or they just don't lose their cool when they're in traffic. They're calm, and everything is fine for them. Something like that. So get an image first of that ideal self, so you really have a sense of how you would look, how you would stand, how you would hold yourself, how you would move through the world, and make that as attractive as you can make it. And at the time we have here, of course, I'm just going to ask you to do that kind of as quickly as you can, but to just make a really nice, attractive image of yourself, one that really has the qualities that you want, and one that when you see that image in your mind's eye, really brings up all of those good feelings. So adjust it in whatever way you want to, so that when it comes into your mind, it just feels good to think about yourself in that way. And then for now, I'm just going to ask you to set that image aside as well. And what we're going to do is a variation on the swish that I call the Star Trek swish pattern, because we're going to use a size and distance swish. That is, we're going to send this image, this unwanted image, way off into space where no image has ever gone before. So in other words, let's say that your issue is a traffic incident, or whatever it is for you, or like I said, it could be an interaction with another person. But if it were the traffic incident, we'll call that the trigger picture, or another person. We'll call that the trigger picture, and just take that trigger picture and put it in front of you the way that you see it when you're actually there, and notice just how quickly you start to get those unwanted feelings. And as soon as you start to feel the unwanted feelings, then let that picture move farther and farther away, and notice that as it moves away, it gets smaller and smaller, and it moves off into the distance, all the way to the other end of the galaxy, where it comes a little spot in space way off at the other end of the galaxy. Okay, so just shrink it down, let it get smaller and smaller, and all of the color draining out of it until it's just a tiny dot in space at the other side of the universe. And now, while that's out there, what's going to happen is that little dot in space is going to get transformed, and what it's actually going to be is that picture of your ideal self, the one that we created a minute ago. And that image of your ideal self is going to start to come back towards you, closer and closer to you, getting larger and larger and larger until it stops right in front of you. And you feel all those good feelings associated with that ideal self. Now, we've just done this in slow motion, so I can't imagine that you really felt much. But here's the way that it works in practice. You get it built up like that, so you figure out, here are the triggers. There might be multiple triggers for a particular situation. You also can use this with habits, things like biting your fingernails, smoking cigarettes, any number of things. So think about the trigger, and when you get the trigger, hold that trigger picture in mind just long enough to begin to get the unwanted feeling. And as soon as you start to feel it, then just push that picture away to the other end of the universe, and then bring back in that image of the ideal self. Just take a nice big breath as it comes in, and just really greet it, and really get all the good feelings that that image has to offer you. And then you blank the screen, and then you set it up again. You picture the trigger picture in your mind. Notice the unwanted feeling as soon as it begins, just begins. Push it away and bring in the ideal self picture. And hang on to all the good feelings that you get from that ideal self. So at the beginning, at the end, it takes just a moment. That is the trigger picture you want to hold until you start to notice that it's going to move in a direction that you don't want it to go. And then you push it away, and then you bring in the ideal self, and you hold that long enough to be able to get a good felt sense from it. And then you let it fade away. And then again, set it up again and again and again, and just keep repeating it. But each time, blanking the screen in between is an important issue, because otherwise the message that you really want to send to your brain is you want to tell your brain, not that, this. Not that unwanted thing, this high-quality state. Not that, this. And so the reason you need to blank the screen in between each iteration of that is that otherwise you're sending your brain a message that says go from here to here to here to here to here to here, back and forth like that. We don't want the wobble. What we want is the next time in the real world that you come in contact with that trigger, for the immediate next thought on your mind would be an experience of that ideal self. And it'll probably occur unconsciously. In fact, it may very well be that the next time that trigger is there, it just causes you to feel good about yourself. And that's the kind of change that we want to put into place.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael, for not only explaining that, but helping us to, create those processes and experiences here tonight. I want to thank you for participating tonight. It's been awesome hearing from you. I'd like to thank everybody who's actually participating online and who's paid attention to this webcast for their time. Every Sunday night we get together to learn a little bit about hypnosis, share a little bit about hypnosis, and experience a little bit of hypnosis. A couple things I want to mention. First of all, the schedule for HypnoThoughts Live has been posted. So go over to hypnothoughts.com or go over to the HypnoThoughts Live webpage and check out that schedule. Lots of great stuff coming up this summer in August when we get together in Las Vegas. Right here at the top is actually a link to Michael's class at HPTI that starts on March 1st. And if you give me just a minute to edit this page, hold on just a minute, everybody, don't go anywhere. I'm actually going to add a link to the free to the script book of. So let me add it here. Da, 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 da. So hold on. What you're doing is you're patiently waiting for me to add the link to the script book. So here we go. I'm going to add media using my nifty WordPress thingamajigger. Okie dokie. I have embedded a link between the chat box and the video. So if you don't see it, you just need to refresh your page and that link will show up. It says Script Book Volume 1. And that's the entire script book from the HypnoThoughts Script Book Volume 1 that Scott Sandlin put together probably about 3, 4, maybe even 5 years ago. And so go ahead and download it. It's there. It's been great having everybody here tonight. It's been great having Michael. Give him a round of applause if you'd like to in the chat box. And of course, that's accomplished by typing out a whole bunch of 3s. So, Michael Watson, thank you for participating tonight. Everybody who has been here, thank you for participating. Scott Sandlin and I will return next week. Same time, same channel, same place, same URL for another great opportunity to learn, talk about, and practice hypnosis. Thanks.
All right.
Bye, Michael.